Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion on strategies for implementing new technologies in an outsourcing environment. For those of you who have been following our bio panel series, we've focused on different aspects of new technology impact and adoption in the bioprocessing sector over the past several years. And we've had some really excellent panels on the subject. Even though we all know that adopting new technologies is tough, we continue to collectively demonstrate in our industry that it's not only possible, but it's well worth the effort. This year we decided to focus on how this process works specifically in an outsourced environment, since much of the manufacture of our products, particularly for early stage companies, is done by CDMOs. So how on earth do you manage the business of keeping client projects moving forward on tight timelines and budgets and meeting client expectations and adopt new technologies and stay current with the rest of the industry? Well, we've assembled a panel of CDMO technology rock stars to help walk us through the challenges, best practices, and opportunities in this area. All three of these guys have been involved in solving challenging real-world problems in biomanufacturing processes that we see every day in our programs, as well as implementing important novel technologies that enable new capabilities for their business. So I'll introduce each of our panelists and then ask them to share a few thoughts on the topic to get the discussion rolling. And then we'll move to questions, including hopefully from some of you in the audience, to get into the topic in more detail. All right, so first up is Jesse McCool. Jesse is Chief Technology Officer of Cytovance. He was promoted in between when Brian did his introduction and when I did mine. So Jesse began his career after completing his postdoc in Tilman Gerngross's lab at Dartmouth and started with a small biotech company called Mascoma, after which he moved on to positions of increasing scientific and technical responsibility in the CMO world, first at Lonza and most recently at Cytovance. So Jesse, welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Tom. Say something now?
Sure.
Okay. I just wanted to thank Tom for the invitation to come speak. Appreciate the opportunity. My history at Cytovance is it's been almost 6 years since I've been with the company. We're a relatively small company located in Oklahoma City. And when I started, we were a private equity-backed company. We were purchased in 2015 by a larger parent company. And the investment in expansion since that time has been very rapid. Before private equity, it was just a different business situation. But as soon as our new parent company took over, there's a significant interest in expanding our site in Oklahoma City. There's a lot of greenfield space to grow into. And so I've seen sometimes on the sidelines, I look after the R&D services area in open innovation, but we do a lot of new technology implementation in even R&D services. And what I've seen is it's, working with parent company, there's a lot of planning, and the planning is almost the most important piece, and it's leveraging a lot of different functional areas: finance, engineering, manufacturing, customer, the voice of the customer, really to try to put together a 3-year plan. And that's really where our investments, the decisions around our investments start. It's looking at that rolling 3-year plan. So once we established that 3-year plan, we really took a look at the competitor situation. We took a look at the trends in the market and looked at what we thought were gaps in our services and just really aimed at filling those gaps over the course of 3 years. And I'd say we've made a lot of progress in 3 years. We've actually invested about $36 million in new technology, new capabilities. And it's often hard to do that while you're processing and while you're servicing other customers. So it was a challenge, but I think one of the key things is hiring the right people. And a lot of this comes down to resources, talent, experience, and having a critical mass of engineers, having a critical mass of capital planning people that are just focused on project management of capital projects, having the right leadership in place that has knows how to do it, has been there, done that. So the two major drivers for us as far as new technology implementation, really it's strategic investment. It's bringing new technology in the door as a function of adding new services, new capabilities, enhancing capabilities, or bringing new technology in the door just because of organic growth and adding new lines because we have enough customers to justify an additional line. So those are the two big sort of drivers for adding new technology, and I'll let my colleagues up here say some things before we get back into it. Okay.
Great. Thanks so much, Jesse. Next is Jesus Zerdo, who is Senior Vice President of Process Sciences at Rentschler, who we recently joined after over 11 years at Lonza. Jesus received his undergraduate and doctoral degrees in biochemistry and molecular biology from UAM in Madrid, and Jesus, welcome to him.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the invitation and introduction. About me, and about innovation, I think my perspective is a bit different from standard people working in CMOs. I spent many years working in CMOs in Lonza and now in Rentschler, but my background is in drug discovery, and I think for me it's important to really understand the need of the end user and the need of the patient ultimately, and the urgency sometimes the customers bring up with, and try to accommodate that with the requirements manufacturing has and the compliance that is always a given, the quality and the restrictions the facilities and the equipment have. But I think it's important, and I think my history, what I've seen, is important to be able to accommodate the demands and the interests of the customers, and try to see how we could do things differently, how we can challenge our processes, our structures, our equipment in order to deliver what is required. And I think it's just getting that sensitivity to the need of the customer, but also sometimes preempt the need. Is be able to see what if we could do things differently. Is it really required to do things a given way? We could talk a bit more about that, but I think bioprocessing in particular has evolved dramatically, and now we're in a situation where there's more flexibility that we can leverage in order to speed up access of new products to the clinic, but also manufacture in different scales in different ways that are maybe not so much charge in terms of financial costs up front, but actually allow our customers, innovative companies, to really defer some of this cost until when it's really needed, when they need to go into the market.
Thanks, Jesus. Okay, well, finally, we're fortunate to have Andy Topping joining us today, and Andy is Chief Scientific Officer at Fujifilm Diosynth Biotechnologies. Andy has a long and distinguished career in biotech after receiving his PhD from University of Wales, Cardiff. And he has a distinction of working for at least 5 different companies without changing his job in his entire career. So I count Fujifilm, MSD, Biologics, and Avicia, and Andy helped me remember Zeneca and ICI on that list. So Andy, welcome.
Thanks, Tom. 26 years in a very sort of similar role with a variety of different companies, all with the same office, almost. And thanks, Tom, for reminding everyone just how old I am. I guess I should just say that most of that time I've been working with Tom as well on the various projects, just to share the love. So I work for Fujifilm Diosynth. We're a large contract development manufacturing organisation, sites in the UK and in the US. And I guess if the young Andy Topping with more hair and smaller waistline was sitting here, he'd actually look at the process if you operate today, and I think they'd be pretty familiar, actually. I don't think, actually, the things that we're doing have changed that much. How we do them, the detail of how we do them has changed, but what we're doing hasn't really changed that much. And I think that's probably one of the things that I'd take away from some of the how we implement new technology, is that it's a slow-moving beast. You know, things don't change very fast in this industry, and even over 26 years, you'd still recognise those same processes. Lots of the things we do are very similar. Maybe it's now in a bag rather than a steel tank, but it's basically the same process we're running. And across the course of that 26 years, we've worked on all kinds of projects, all kinds of interesting stuff, and some technology isn't quite like that. Some technology isn't just a kind of inching forward. One that comes to mind is high pressure refold. So maybe the fact that no one's heard about this sort of reflects how these step changes in technology tend to fare. So at Billingham, we implemented a high pressure refold system on the back of a client's project that they were implementing this technology on, and this thing looked like the barrel of a World War II battleship. I mean, this thing was 20 feet long, 8-inch thick steel tube. When we were all at school and things, we were all told about how incompressible water is. Well, if you push hard enough, it's not incompressible. So this thing had a volume of about 100 litres, and effectively we squeezed 110 litres of water into this tube, 4,000 bar pressure. And at a high pressure, proteins denature, and then as you release the pressure, you can refold them. It's a really neat technology. But it's been dismantled. The tube has gone back to its battleship. We're not using it anymore. So it kind of illustrates the problems with some of these step changes. At Fujifilm, we have a slightly different position from my two colleagues up here on the stage. We're part of a big corporate organisation, of course, and we have a lot of capability in terms of corporate research, corporate development that we can tap into. So actually finding the ability to do innovation work whilst the plane is flying and we're doing customer projects actually isn't quite the same challenge as maybe it is for the others.
Great. Okay, well, thanks for those introductory remarks. That's really helpful, and I think all of you talked a little bit about the importance of the customer in this whole process. And Andy, in your case, I do remember the high pressure refolding unit. That was pretty spectacular implementation, but for just one project and for one customer. And Jesus, you mentioned how important thinking about the customer is. So let's talk a little bit about what are the driving forces that you see from customers that are most important to them in implementing new technology. What really moves the needle as you're looking at a new technology in terms of what it could do for your customers, and what maybe isn't as important as we might think at first?
Well, the feedback from me would be the key driver for a lot of our early phase clients is it's the timeline to IND filing, and whatever we can do to get there faster is very desirable. And so there's always questions about, are you going to be investing in higher throughput technology, automation, and the answer is we're always looking at options. There are lots of ways of doing higher throughput testing and experimentation, but that's the driver from our client side. It's really just timeline, and we hear that over and over again. For the later phase clients, it's a lot different. It's not about timeline. It's more about scale. It's more about single use and cost effectiveness. And so those are the two types of clients that we're hearing from a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's spot on. I think for most of the clinical customers, it's all about timeline, as you'd expect. Get into the clinic, fail quickly. All those things still apply. I think most of those clients are perfectly willing to consider new approaches, new technologies, if they can see a real benefit in it for them. At the later phase, into commercialization, then the drivers are completely different, really. And it is around making sure that this is robust technology. It's going to be there for the long term. It's going to really drive down cost of goods. Timeline is important, of course, for those guys as well, but it's just not the driver in the same way that it is for the early first-in-man studies.
I agree with you both. I think what I've seen is there's more push for speed. And at the same time, there's the need of having flexibility, because some things are an unknown quantity when our customers are developing a product. Their timelines are not that set in stone. So it's be able to accommodate not only the times, but also the requirements they have. But the other point I think is important is it depends on the customer. Some customers are very sage into what they are going to need in terms of development, what things can go wrong in the clinic. But others are not familiar with what it takes to develop a new product. So sometimes it involves a bit of an education exercise to really sit down and see what they want to do, what are going to be the patients, how many patients they want to treat, what are the risks they're going to face, and offer solutions early on that otherwise they might never have considered. For example, formulation, something that comes to mind right now, that people are becoming more and more interested in considering, because they don't want to find out later on in phase 2 or later that they cannot formulate for the required route of administration.
And those are great points, and I think we hear that as well. The need for speed is really omnipresent in our industry, and even as the accelerated pathways to approval start to advance, that's extending into the late stage, where we're often finding ourselves on the critical path, or most often, unfortunately. Coming back to sort of the customer interaction a little bit, let's talk a little bit about how you differentiate between specific customer needs. I think you gave a great example, Andy, of a high pressure refold that one customer needed versus broader market needs. Do you have a process for evaluating customer requests for new technology to make sure they fit within your long-term framework, or are you willing to sort of take on all comers in terms of new technology adoption? How does that process work, and how do you deal with those issues?
Well, I think actually an individual client pitching up and saying, I've got this technology I want you to look at, that's relatively rare, actually, I think. Most people don't have a trick technology which they're looking to find someone who wants to adopt or to use that they've used to develop their product. So that doesn't happen that often, and I think actually as CMO, one of the big advantages of being a CMO is you get to see a ton of stuff that's out there. Not just the projects you work on, but the projects you propose on, and so you get a really good idea of what the direction of travel is of the industry. And I think that's really what we would use to try and identify what should we be doing, what sort of new techniques or new equipment or new approaches should we be approaching. I think it's much more from that, what are we seeing in that marketplace of projects rather than individual projects themselves.
We from time to time will evaluate bringing in a client-specific equipment need, instrument need. For us, it's maybe a little bit more common to hear that, well, we need a variable path length spec for the suite, and we need to be able to do protein concentration determination on the spot and have stat data, and we don't have that capability now in our suite. So we recently actually purchased 2 solo VPEs to accommodate that processing need for that client. And in this particular case, we just negotiated with the client. So the client relationship is very important. Client was willing to fund one of them, and we paid for the other one. And we compromised. In other cases, we hear feedback about, for example, we don't have, right now, currently we do a lot of outsourcing for protein characterization services, characterizing the reference material. So we manage that as an outsourcing activity, but we would really prefer to do that in-house. And so we've actually looked at investment in building a protein characterization laboratory, and we actually started this year investing in something that really doesn't have a great ROI, but a mass spec, and that is being installed right now. And so we will have a capability that seems to be really important to a lot of our clients, but it doesn't really have a direct and easy way to measure ROI. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think for what I've seen is we have this request sometimes are driven not so much the customer will bring the technology, but they bring a product that requires a different solution. Something that comes to mind is the perfusion technology, for example. We have done quite extensively in the past, and it came from the need of customers that had issues with stability and productivity of some of the molecules. And at that point in time, we made a decision of really, it was a two-way road. It was integrating this technology would help us really getting familiar and developing solutions that could help us with all the customers. So I think it's a bit of a tension there. You can be infinitely flexible, because otherwise your facility will be completely clogged with stuff that you cannot use. But at the same time, it gives you the opportunity to really develop solutions that could be useful for future products.
Okay, well, great. Well, let's move a little bit into specific technologies now. There are many new technologies that we all are hearing about, this week and this year, offering promising solutions to long-term manufacturing needs industry-wide. And some of the ones that I'll just list off include novel cell line development technologies, even using CRISPR-Cas in cell line development, things like that. Improved approaches to discovering novel affinity ligands, moving analytical methods closer to the floor. Solo VPE is one example, but obviously the ability to do things like multi-attribute monitoring, single-use technologies, operational advances like continuous processing and process intensification. That's near and dear to my heart. Advances in automation and digitization, electronic batch records, things like that. So, I'd love to get your perspective on what's of particular interest to you. What are some of the areas that you think are of greatest import, like in the near term, for new technology advances in our industry?
We've focused on, over the last, I would say, 4 years, on adding a little bit on the early phase side and then a little on the later phase. So on the early phase, we've invested in cell line development services. We didn't offer cell line development as a formal service. We have been doing it since Genzyme days. We were a Genzyme facility many years ago, and we still have some of the same people doing cell line development. There is a lot of experience, but we didn't have it as a service. So we actually we brought down some very experienced folks from some ex-Pfizer folks. John Mott was at our facility for a couple of years, and he really helped us kind of flesh out a good plan and a facility design, equipment. And so we ended up investing pretty heavily in single cell printing and imaging technology. That was a really quick hit, because we were within less than a year we were able to implement new technology and offer a new service by the end of that year, and that was really exciting. And also for the folks that had been doing that kind of work for so many years in Oklahoma City, they actually had a really direct connection to our clients, and that's a really important client need that we could now meet. Other areas that we've invested heavily in is more process characterization, and we have several clients that are later phase. We've recently underwent a PLI this year, and then last year we had a successful PLI. And so we've been doing more support on late phase, stage 1 process design. So we've invested a lot in some of our IT has had to come up to speed to kind of serve that. We're investing in PI, data historians. And to keep up with some of the IT investments, we've had to invest in IT infrastructure. So all the stuff in the background, and going from physical servers to virtual servers. And there's a lot of proactive measures that we're taking on the IT side that aren't that noticeable, as you tour the lab. But other assets that we've invested in are things like Amber 15. That's been a really interesting and useful tool for doing more high throughput in design of experiments types of approaches. But it's a little flavor of what we've invested in on the R&D side. On the manufacturing side, it's really been just investing in some redundancies, single-use technology, single-use mixing technology. Impulse has been a really important tool for us. Impulse, we have 30-liter, and then 2 5,000-liter systems for GMP, and that's been a really useful tool for protein refolding. For a lot of our projects are microbial-based. So that's a little bit on the manufacturing side.
I think at Fujifilm Diosynth we're probably interested in most of the things on your list in one shape or form. So everything from new ways of doing cell line development and single cell cloning using microfluidics, cytomine system, lots of robotic systems. We have a big push in the company to try to move towards, let's say, drier science. So, we don't want to have so many highly qualified, rather scarce scientists in the lab who are making up solutions and dealing with so much of the craft of doing the experiments. We would like, to automate those systems to put in higher throughput or eventually predictive technologies once we have enough data, so we can actually just use machine learning to predict the outcome of some of those experiments. So a big push and emphasis there. all the way through to continuous chromatography and continuous manufacture in general, so upstream all the way through. Fujifilm have actually announced that they're supporting development of a proof of concept lab at one of our sites, so a 500-litre perfusion system with then a completely continuous downstream purification process using some novel technology that's been developed within the company. Sensors, we're really interested in actually trying to get PAT to really work rather than just being a concept that everyone sort of buys into but no one really can figure out how to use. So new sensors, of course things like the Solo VPE and things like that we can use on the plant floor, but how do we get things like mass spec using the multi-attribute monitoring, how do we get that actually onto the plant floor to use that rather than sending off samples and 2 days later finding out what we should have done. So some real pushes, I think, in all those areas. I think the most difficult ones actually for from a client perspective to understand are some of those, some of the backroom kind of activities that Jesse was referring to, which we are really keen to progress. So electronic batch records and things like that, much more difficult for clients to see the benefit, and actually therefore much more difficult to us to justify the investment to our owners as to what are we going to get out of this.
Right, and yet, it's crazy in this day and age that we're still all using paper batch records, right? I mean, the only time I see a paper batch record is on the plant floor. Otherwise, it's a PDF of a paper batch record. So why aren't we there? I don't know. Yeah. Jesus, sorry.
I mean, the list you have, I think I would completely subscribe, is all of them. And I would personally, I have 2 points, and just touch on what Jesse was commenting. I think for CMOs it's important to get earlier contact with the product and what it is and what it does and how it behaves. And this means front-loading activities that would help us understanding the behavior of the molecule, but also co-create with our customers the best possible entity that is going to be developed in our hands. So this means better ways of developing cell lines. Analytics, you mentioned, is very, very important there. Be able to map quality attributes very early on during clone selection through partnerships, through internal work, but also being able to assess risks before they appear. Because when they appear in development or in manufacturing, it's too late and it's very expensive. The other area that for us is important is looking at the value chain from the idea to the clinic and the market, and really understand the needs of our customers. For example, in our case, we are very active in partnerships with a company called Lococare in formulation development, but also fill finish. And that's something we see for our customers is very useful because they don't need to deal with many different partners to have a product getting all the way into the clinic. There's the digital issue, I'll call it like that is very, very close to our hearts at the moment, and we are putting a bit of effort in developing a new data science strategy. I agree with you. I mean, this and age is still thinking about paper records is just outrageous, but it's the reality. And I think the industry will have to bite the bullet sooner or later and go for it. I think it's going to be beneficial not only to our customers, but to us as well. It's going to be easier to trace deviations, to trace any issues. And I think once we really understand that it's worth the pain, and we take the pain on, it's going to be easier. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, and I appreciate the patient-centric aspect too. I think we really don't do enough as an industry to try to tie our quality attributes to product performance and to appreciate the formulation challenges. So, no, great points. Questions from the audience? Anybody have a question for the panel? Somebody out there must have a riveting question. All right, we'll continue with my list then. The next thing, maybe just to delve into a little bit, is how you build a team that's really, world class at developing new technologies. What skill sets do you find you really need to ensure successful adoption? Jesse touched on this a little in his intro remarks. And how do these differ from the skill sets that are needed to just operate a CMO business? And conversely, how well can you tap into the existing organization to help with the whole new technology adoption process?
I can take that. I think this is a crucial point. I think it's difficult to really. The field is evolving very, very fast, and I see CMOs need to get new, fresh blood from the outside to look at experiences related to process development or also drug development that would enrich the way we deal with products. That is something for Rentschler is very important at the moment. It historically has been a company based in the south of Germany, very successful, very innovative, but it has realized, it has reached the conclusion that in order to be a global player, we need to play a different game. We need to get talent from outside. There's been a substantial renewal of the management, but also we recently opened a facility here in the US, in Milford, and the idea is again to tap on different culture, different ways of doing things, different talent. For us it's very important, being connected to where the action happens. So I think it's one of the most critical aspects right now. If you want to be an innovative company, you need to get the right people.
I can riff on that a little bit. I agree. The industry is changing so fast. It is important to get new perspectives into your company and always bring that energy into the team. Definitely need to have a good foundation, a good organizational structure. I think the first and foremost thing is really to have a good plan that puts everybody on the same direction, so that there's some goal in mind, and that we can all the different organizational functional groups can be aligned. We, in our organization, over time we've had to recruit from the coast where there's more experience. But one thing that is really exciting about our company right now is so we've reached that critical mass of people from other industries in pharma, and bringing their knowledge, their experience, relocating to Oklahoma City, and now we're able to actually train locally, and that's a really exciting opportunity for our city, for the people that live there. There's a biotech. Oklahoma City is 30%, 40% oil and gas, and biotech is not as big, but we actually have OK Bio has a booth down here. There's about probably 40 or 50 biotech companies in Oklahoma City alone. So it's a growing activity in terms of fundraising. Definitely, there's a lot of research in pharmaceutical development. There are actually a couple blockbuster drugs actually came out of Oklahoma. One of them is Solaris from Alexion. So there's a good core workforce in Oklahoma City, and now we're working on training our own. And so we actually have done some things in terms of organizational development. We've created a functional area just to look at organizational development, and we've licensed in some biotech, bioengineering training programs from some great resources local, and that really has helped us to really change our approach to bringing talent from locally, from Oklahoma. Another thing that really helps to foster new technology coming into our company is actually open innovation. So that's something that Andy touched on. It's a very big, a very, very important aspect of our organization, and we've invested very heavily in our R&D. We have probably about 60% of the time people are working on client projects, but the other 40% of the time we have R&D people working on open innovation projects, and that really just helps us gain experience in new technologies, evaluate new equipment, instrumentation, and without that bandwidth, it's really impossible to do the hard work, the client work, and actually sort of play in the lab. This is not skunk works, but it's actually really focused and strategic. Looking ahead a year, you're probably going to need to invest in a mass spec or some PAT inline technology. So the R&D folks spend some of their time doing that evaluation, and it gives the R&D folks they have skin in the game. They get to go to conferences and present, and that drives a lot of energy and engagement. So that's a really good thing for the folks at the company. And we also have somebody in charge of that, and that's also, it fosters that philosophy of doing open innovation. So I don't know if.
Yeah, no, I agree absolutely with that. I think a lot of this is just about realising the potential of the team you've got. It's very tempting in a CMO to chain your scientists to the bench and just have them working on project after project. But actually, they need to get out and about. They need to see what's happening in the world. They need to have opportunities to see something new and make the connection with what they've been doing and what the problems they've had. And then if you get any bunch of those together and say, okay, what ideas have you got? They're going to have a ton of ideas, and it's making sure there's an avenue to do something with them. And I think that's a lot of the challenge, is making sure there is a way that people see ideas progress. If they don't, then it's very easy for people to kind of give up telling you about this great idea they've had because they don't see anything happening. So I think it's about having that culture of making sure people don't feel like they're chained to the bench and just doing the same thing over and over again, getting them out and about at conferences, at trade shows, all kinds of things, and then giving them the opportunity to actually do something with those ideas. And lots of them might go nowhere, but it's just the opportunity to do that. One more thing to add, I guess, about this is, we've talked a little bit about return on investment and things like that for some of the innovation and some of the new techniques and new technologies, which can be difficult discussions, to make those arguments when some of this is, I'm not quite sure how we use it, but it sounds really good. It's something we should have an interest in. And I think we shouldn't play down the amount that, this is a science industry, and people like working with scientists. So people like working with teams who are interested in science and are driven by understanding things and new technology, even if they don't use it on the project that the client is about to ask you to do. They like to work with a team who are interested in this sort of stuff. So I think there's a lot of side benefits, even though it's very hard to say, well, you didn't use that mass spec that we spent $500,000 on. Well, actually you kind of did, because those people who came around and saw it knew that you were a company that were interested in and developing people and this technology, even if they didn't use it on their project. So I think there's a lot more to this than a straight buy a piece of equipment and use it.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And one of the really important aspects of this is the regulatory aspect. Implementing new technology not only requires that it be successful technically, but also has to be accepted by the regulators. And so I'm just curious, in your experience in adopting new technologies as a CMO, what do you find your role in the regulatory communication process is related to your clients? Since you probably understand the technology much better in some cases than the client, but the client's obviously responsible for the application to the regulators. So.
I think it depends. I think it very, very depends on customers, depends on the program. Normally, customers don't push back saying, hey, careful with regulations. It's the opposite. And I think the challenge for CDMOs, but in general for the industry, is that we tend to be very conservative just in case regulators might pose this question. So there's a clear path. We have traveled before and is tested and is valid, and that is the temptation, just to go through there. But my experience with regulators is that far more innovative and far more open than we give them credit for. And in my previous roles, I have engaged with regulatory agencies, and they love innovation, they love new approaches. So I think probably we need to do more as an industry to come up with new approaches, with new ways of doing things. Obviously, always keeping in mind patient safety is the central element we need to comply with. But I think we need to change that. I mean, yes, it's true. If you have done it before, surely you won't have big obstacles. But that might pose limitations into how you develop products as well. So I think that's an area probably we need to do as an industry, do more, engage with regulators and push for new ways of doing things that, of course, deliver the right product, the right quality, and the right safety to patients.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Regulators aren't scared of new technology. They love new technology. It's customers that are scared of new technology mostly. And I think, but actually, as I was saying right at the beginning, I think truly new technologies, but actually fairly rare. So a buffer, making up buffers, of course. We could use inline conditioning, inline dilution system to make up our buffers rather than weighing out solids and adding water. The stuff coming out the end of the pipe is still the same. And if you focus on the things that are the same, and we've just got there via a different route, that actually makes people a lot more comfortable. The cell line development, yes, we've isolated single cells in a different way, but they're still single cells, and we still image them in the same way to prove that they're single cells. So actually the process we're using and how we're documenting it is actually much more similar usually than it is different.
I think the only comment I would add on that is, I think our responsibility as a service provider is to ensure that what we do is in line with regulatory expectations and ICH guidelines, but that because we have to serve early phase and late phase, we have to have some kind of flexibility. So it's our responsibility, I think, as CMOs to continuously look at the regulatory affairs issues and changes and the updates that are released. We actually just completed a phase-appropriate GMP assessment of our quality system, and we have, one of the things that is a challenge is actually communicating and conveying to all the stakeholders at a company this is how we do things. And so we have created a really nice matrix for everybody to kind of understand, okay, when do you have to bring in that working cell bank? When can you just work with the master cell bank? And based on that continuous study and analysis, we think we can satisfy that need is providing services that are in line with industry expectations. The other thing I could mention is regarding the flexibility side. It's also our responsibility to really to the patients to really get as soon as possible safe and efficacious material into the hands of the clinicians that are doing these studies. And so there's sort of two parts there.
All right, I think we have time for one final question. Oh, okay, Oleg, please. Do we have a mic up? Here comes Chris.
Thank you. This has been an excellent panel. I have a question for Andy. I just caught up on the announcement you mentioned about the new facility. I was wondering if there is something more you could add, because this is the first of its kind project that has been announced by a CMO. And my other question is, how do you approach managing this in terms of resources and people? Do you have a specific group that's solely focused on this, or do you pull resources from like scientists from the bench? And last but not least, the downstream operation that's mentioned in there, are there publications forthcoming? Is it a column-based technology? Can you just talk briefly about that?
So what was announced was Fujifilm are establishing in our facility in the UK a continuous manufacturing proof of concept lab, really, but manufacturing scale. So this is 500 litre perfusion upstream, leading then through to continuous purification. This is set up for antibodies, but it could run for other proteins as well. So this is work that's been going on between Fujifilm Diasynth and corporate Fujifilm for the last 3 years, looking at both innovations around how we run the upstream, around the medium we use, because of course perfusion uses enormous quantities of medium, making sure the cell line is optimized and able to survive the stresses and things associated with very high density culture in perfusion, and then all the way through the downstream. And the particular challenge for us around the downstream has been traditionally, of course, if we want to run a downstream process continuously, we have to link together the unit operations, and actually that's rather challenging when your chrome skid comes from GE and your intermediate holding tank comes from Sartorius and your UFDF comes from Millipore. They all speak different languages, if you like, all of these systems. It's a very difficult, cumbersome system to try and put together, plus very difficult for the operators to actually run. They've got to know how to operate all these systems, be familiar with the software. So we've actually developed in-house a single system which can run all of the unit operations. So it can run as a UFDF or as a chrome skid or as a viral filtration or viral inactivation in a single-use system, And it can also mix the buffers at point of use, because of course the other issue with running all of the unit operations all the time is that you need all of the buffers available all of the time, which becomes rather large. This has been developed by a specific team who've developed this, and now as we're putting together the proof of concept lab, that will be handed over to more regular operators and scientists. It's intended to be more automated, so it spins the plates by itself, if you like, rather than having to have a lot of manual intervention. But honestly, the first few runs, it's everyone who's not bolted to the floor will be in, making sure and babysitting this thing to make certain it works.
That's great. Well, I'd like to just thank all of our panelists right now. I think it's been a great discussion. Thank you for sharing how Cytovance, Fujifilm, and Rentschler are adopting new technologies and giving your thoughts on this. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.